Hi, welcome to Haven. This is a podcast that's a safe space for curiosity and conversation. I'm your host, Haven, and today I'm curious about emotional literacy. Emotional literacy. This is something that I've actually struggled with in adulthood, and I didn't even realize I was struggling with it until I became a parent. And one of the tactics is trying to help your child name emotions. If you heard the last episode of Gentle Parenting, so much of it is just labeling the feeling. And what I found was everything must be frustrated. Like, oh, you're feeling frustrated, or isn't that frustrating? Like, that was the main word that would come up. And I was like, there's so many other emotions than just that one. Why is this the one that's coming up for me all the time? Like, surely there's other ways. And I was like, maybe it's because, in high school and college, I read so much more and I'm just not reading. Like, maybe I cannot think of like any type of like outside vocabulary right now. It's really been simplified. And I was like, no, like even with that, like even if I'm looking at a feelings chart of it going through, it's really hard for me to then narrow down exactly what it is that I'm feeling. And I feel like it's also even me saying that. And I feel like it's an important thing and an important skill to have, not only as you're relating with others, but even as you're relating to yourself, in the sense of like, I grew up in a home and it just, I'm looking back and like, it's such a wave now to talk about like labeling emotions, categorizing them, telling them. I just don't think we really talked about it. Like, we were very expressive kinds of people, but it wasn't like saying, this is what you're feeling in that moment, or this is what's coming up. Like, and so I feel pretty illiterate in that area, and I'm working on it. I got my kids a feelings chart. We point to it at the end of the day, the two feelings that we're feeling. I even have an app that's really, really helpful to me. It's called How We Feel, and it prompts you at certain times of the day. And like, it helps you narrow down what you're feeling based on that to work on this skill. And I was talking with a different friend about how this comes up. And he was like, yeah, I was like, there's a story about this therapist where this, girl was in a fight with her boyfriend. She was like, well, I feel sad. And she was like, okay, tell me more about that. And then she just kept saying, well, I feel sad and sad. And then they were trying to pinpoint a more specific emotion based on that. Like, well, was it, betrayed? Or, disgusted or whatever. And ultimately the word that she landed on, that how she was actually feeling, was, I feel humiliated. Like, I feel like you humiliated me, which is a very different response than even just sad. And I think if like even her going to her boyfriend is saying like, oh, I feel sad. Like, that's a different response out of him of like, okay, like why or what, versus, hey, I feel humiliated. He's going to have a different course of action and discourse with her based on her being able to present that in herself and acknowledge it and bring it up. So I think that this is a huge key in relationships and in connection of being able to identify within ourselves what emotions are coming up. And it's something that I'm still trying to explore. So I wanted to bring in a guest who is actually, she's getting her master's as like a marriage and family therapist right now. So I was like, you are in the thick of what the science behind this is. And so I want to welcome Angel back to the pod. Welcome, Angel.
Hello.
You came on before in last season. Mm-hmm. It's a new location. You're very familiar with this because it's where I live and you're here all the time.
Yes. My second home.
Your second home. Mm. So, Angel, we talked about this before, and you actually have so much of the terminology. You'll send me pictures of like your textbooks and you're like, this is what we were talking about, or this is what that means. So why don't you kick us off overall of like, what does it sound in the like psychological background for emotional literacy?
So I personally have been in psychology for like 6 years of my life. And right now I'm taking a course called Techniques in Counseling. And I'm so blessed because my professor is literally a world-renowned emotions expert. She literally wrote the book on it. I stepped into class that day thinking that I knew what was up. Like, I've been doing this for a long time. And I don't know if you've ever been in a room with somebody who just like violates your view of reality. Mm-hmm. Everything she would say, I would just sit there. You would watch everybody in the class just be like, oh my gosh, I know nothing about life, about myself, about my friends, about my relationships.
Mhm.
I was so wrong. And I was like, how could I be so wrong after studying this for so long and just existing and thinking that I was emotionally literate, but in many ways I was very illiterate. And
what's an example of something she said that you were just like, wait a second, like, is that right?
Oh my gosh, this is my favorite story. So the first day of class, she was basically like, ask me any questions you want. This is just a get to know me day. And I was sitting by a girl. She raised her hand and she was basically like, so if I'm the therapist and then I'm sitting across from this client that I want so badly to help, and they're telling me all of this information, all this stuff about their life, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, I need to know where to go next. So how do I stop myself from just getting too in my head and forgetting what she's saying and trying to just like in my head going over all these things, all these directions that I could take this conversation, and just like, how do I get out of my head and be present with this girl that's sitting, or this girl or guy that's sitting in front of me. And it sounded so good. She sounded just so caring, so sweet. Like, oh my gosh, I just want to be the best therapist ever. And then my teacher, she's just so straight to the point because she knows everything. And she basically just said, you have a fear of being vulnerable.
No.
I was sitting right next to this girl. I was like, I'm so sorry. She just embarrassed you like that.
No.
And then she's like, I love to be vulnerable. I'm not scared of being vulnerable. I want to help this girl the best that I can. And then my professor was like, no, what you are describing is a fear of vulnerability, because yes, you want to help her, but what you want to help more than her is yourself, your self-image, and your self-image being strong instead of weak. And she's like, if you really want to be a good therapist, learn how to be vulnerable and learn how to look weak. So you're not looking strong at the expense of this person's health.
Wow. So like the vulnerability of being like, I may have a way long gap or pause when they're done talking because I wasn't thinking of what I was going to say next. But then that means I was actively engaging with what they were saying versus, well, where do I lead this? Or what am I trying to get them to? Or how do I look awesome here? Is that what she was saying?
Yes. And actually silence, that's a big one too. Silence is one of the best techniques your therapist probably use for you. You can use it in any conversation in life, but what silence is just like a pure form of just vulnerability. And you'll notice who's probably has the greatest fear of vulnerability. If you just leave a conversation silent, the first person to interrupt the silence most of the time is the person that's scared to be vulnerable.
But it's true, is like, I would say that like even the silence or feeling the uncomfortability, like the uncomfortability of the pause then makes people want to fill the gap with words.
I think it's a negotiation tactic, and it's also a very powerful communication tool. It's called a power pause. If you're ever listening to like a motivational speaker, they'll do this thing called a power pause, which is they'll just say something really profound, and you know your brain's kind of expecting them to just keep talking, but they just pause. And they say that you can hear the whispers of the message in the pause. And that's the most profound part of the message, in the silence.
See, I'm so torn, because if it's like an excellent communicator, I really love that because it gives dynamics and like some ebb and flow to conversation. I feel like if people are abusing it, I feel like they're trying to emotionally manipulate me into like a response. And I just want to be like, I don't want to give you a response. Like, you know, like I feel like sometimes like, how do you know when that's like a genuine tactic versus...
That's why it's so powerful. If you can like nail the nuance of that, man, people will be like, they just blew the roof off of that place. And they just know when to pause.
Yeah. Okay, so tell me a little about your professor who's like the expert in this field, in the sense of like, what does an emotionally literate person like look like, and how do they engage with that behavior versus an emotionally illiterate? So maybe someone who is like thinking about what they're going to say next versus actually even responding to what's coming at them. Like, what are some other examples of someone who's maybe illiterate emotionally, in the sense of it's not as obvious as like, oh, I can't name my emotions. Like there's way other byproducts of that.
So her whole thing is about your ability to manage and move through 8 difficult emotions. So her thesis for her entire life, the reason she's seen so many set free, she has a TED Talk and it just blew up. She went viral. She's
What
on
is her
so
name?
many. Her name is Dr. Joan Rosenberg.
Okay.
And it's all about how if you can master your emotions, you can basically master your life. So your inability or your ability to move through and experience 8 difficult emotions in life will set you up for a life that is just absolute wreckage, or a life that is just this beautiful daydream of an existence. And then like you're saying, you're like, well, why do some people somehow end up on this continuous scale of like emotional literacy to absolute like literacy? How do you get to emotional literacy? So she's basically saying that what I said before, if you can move through and experience these 8 unpleasant emotions.
And what are those 8 emotions? You can read them off.
Okay, so the 8 unpleasant emotions that science shows are the most difficult to process and stay present in is helplessness, vulnerability, sadness, shame, anger, embarrassment, disappointment, and frustration. And when it comes to these things, I think in society, we're just like, I don't have an emotions problem. I have a fear of this. I just know that I can't do it. My situation's up against me. Like, I can't face this, whatever. But it's very interesting. If you think about your greatest fear, like everybody who's listening, think about your greatest fear and just like imagine facing that. The thing is that you're not afraid of the thing you're thinking about. You're afraid of how that thing makes your body feel.
Okay, it's so true. Like, I want to camp here for a second because I was thinking, okay, of those 8, like, and when you said my greatest fear, I was like, okay, I think my greatest fear is someone that I love deeply and truly passing away, which is kind of, if you think about it, a dumb greatest fear, because that will inevitably happen. Like, it's inevitable. It's not like a greatest fear of I'm going to be buried alive, which is very, very unlikely. But I'm thinking of what that fear is because I love so deeply and so hard for a unique set of people that I think it would just crush my body. I think it would crush my spirit and my soul and my heart. Like that to me. And I think it goes to the 8 emotions of helplessness and sadness. I feel like those are the 2 that it would be touching on, is in my body of like, oh, like I think I can weather anything else in life. But if it happened prematurely, because obviously inevitably everyone's going to die. But I mean, like if that prematurely happened, it would scare me for sure.
What would be the worst part about that for you? Feeling the helplessness and sadness, you said?
The grief, the future lost, the daily connection, so much. I think about like the just immediate circle of people. I think I would just live every day of my life thinking about how I wish that didn't happen.
It sounds like that would be terrifyingly painful to experience in your body, especially if you don't know how long that's going to last. So when it comes to these emotions like this, it just, well, obviously, like the feeling that you feel in your body, it just makes you feel like you're drowning in something that you don't have control over. And also, it produces this anxiety within you because you're like, this might last for forever. And I don't know how to get out of this feeling that seems to be domineering over me.
Yeah, I think that's it.
And it's actually crazy because Dr. David Barlow, he's an anxiety specialist. He literally defines anxiety as uncertainty and apprehension about the future. So I feel like a great part of the fear that makes these emotions so potent and powerful and controlling in our life, so much so that we just want to turn the other way and just not experience them or pretend like they're not there, is because you have no science, like most people don't have science-based knowledge of what emotions are and what they're trying to help you with, how long they last, what you're meant to do with them after it's been just received in your body, and how to overcome it. And especially how to get good at riding the wave of experiencing these emotions rather than avoiding these emotions.
I think so much of it, I read this as an article once. It was talking about a little child who lost like their favorite stuffed animal or something. They couldn't find it and they had to go to bed. And the parent there wanted to be like, well, we'll go look tomorrow, or like we could find another one, or like trying to bring these solutions. But like the visual they said was like a train going through a tunnel. Like the only way to get through difficult emotions is to go through it. Like you can't exit the tunnel earlier. You have to go all the way through, which is like you lost your stuffed animal, and that's gut wrenching. Like that's your favorite comfort thing. Going to sleep doesn't feel the same, like wailing and crying and upset, but like being present and acknowledging that feeling and seeing it pass, like seeing it through to the end. There is that end. But when we try and like either over solution it or like, you know, ignore it or disconnect or self-soothe or unhealthily medicate, like you're not going through the emotion in your body. So it actually perpetuates it and it doesn't give it the opportunity to exit the tunnel and have closure and end.
Absolutely. In Dr. Joan Rosenberg's book, she literally said exactly what you're saying. If you don't go through the pain, you can't go around it. All that's going to happen if you do go around it is that you're going to amplify the pain that's already there speaking to you. And it's just going to grow and grow and grow. And especially when you feel helpless and not knowing what to do with them, all you're left with basically in life is just like a pile of just keeps on adding to it, to it. And you just feel the weight of it. And of course, you would want to absolutely numb out that part of your life. And I think part of the reason that we're like, oh my gosh, no, is because I even had a hard time after this was pointed out in me not saying it. Because my professor was basically telling me that there is no such thing as a good emotion or a bad emotion. And we've stigmatized it so much in our society. Because when we feel something that is unpleasant or difficult, there are unpleasant and difficult emotions. It's not bad at all.
It's true. It goes to the initial one of that woman who was differentiating between sad and humiliated. When it came to humiliated, she was thinking, I don't want to give him the power to humiliate me. Like, no way. Like, it's that, like, instead of just saying, well, that's what I felt, you know? Or someone who's like, I don't want to admit that I feel jealous. Like, oh, that's so embarrassing or like petty to feel jealous about someone. But like, it's real. And like, what are your emotions trying to point you at? What are they trying to show you about like yourself? And like, maybe even it's not necessarily giving it a good spin of jealousy, but you see, hey, I want that. I want to aspire to that. I see that someone has a similar dream and they've achieved it, you know, like it doesn't have to be like this thing that you reject in yourself. It's like, what is it trying to tell me about like what my hopes or fears are? And how can I listen to that?
Truly. That's what I was going to go to next. I didn't learn this from anywhere, but this is the metaphor I use for myself now that really makes me stop calling emotions bad or good. After I learned what emotions actually are in just like neuropsychology, what it basically is, it's really, really, really cute. If you think about it, it's like your body, even these hard to feel emotions, it's your body sending you a text message. And what the text message would say is like, hey, like if it was me, it would be like, hey, Angel, I love you so much. And I just really want you to stay alive because I love that you're alive. So I just want to make your body aware right now. I just want to make sure that you're just being aware of your surroundings. If anything is unsafe, I just want to acknowledge that what you're going through is hard. Like, I just want to make sure that you're aware. Keep holding on. Stay alive. Love you. Love heart. Love Angel. That's all that's happening.
Yeah.
Your emotions are biochemical feedback. They're just giving you feedback from streams of information coming from your brain that you have to know in order to survive.
I think it's so true. Like even that one of like, okay, survival or fear or whatever. Sometimes like anger is someone crossing a boundary of yours. You know, it's like anger is like, ugh, they were late and they disrespected my time. Like it's your body's telling you, hey, I'm not okay with that. I don't like that. And it's showing up as anger.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also like, what is this emotion texting me? What is it saying to me? It's, you know, like, and it's not, there's the book I'm reading, it's The Worry-Free Parent. And it was saying that sometimes anxiety can be intuition turned on itself. And the sense of what I'm feeling out here, oh, it can't be that, or you know, that person couldn't be mean. Maybe it's something about myself, or maybe I'm reading into it, or maybe I looked at it wrong, or maybe this. And it's basically instead of what are the cues that your intuition and what you're picking up in the outside world, what is it telling you instead of you turning it in and be like, oh, that can't be right. Or maybe I'm misinformed, or maybe I was picking something up. It's just acknowledging. It's not saying what you're always picking up is like accurate, but it's at least honoring it and not bypassing it.
Now a quick pause to hear from my sponsors.
This week, my daughter told me that the pancakes I made her were a little too burnt to eat. They were fine to me, but clearly I cannot trust my gut when it comes to cooking. That said, probiotics can't help with most of your gut decisions. But if your gut needs a little support, Ritual has your back. Did you know daily disturbances like poor diets, stress, travel, the use of certain medications, and plenty of other factors can throw off your gut microbiome? Enter Ritual. They created a 3-in-1 supplement including clinically studied prebiotics, probiotics, and a postbiotic to support the relief of mild and occasional bloating, gas, and diarrhea. I take Symbiotic Plus first thing in the morning before I head to the gym as a part of my morning routine. Rigorously tested and validated by a third party for allergens, microbes, and heavy metals. Ritual invested in a study modeling the human colon which showed Symbiotic Plus significantly increased microbial diversity and the growth of beneficial bacteria. Ritual multivitamins are vegan, non-GMO project verified, gluten and major allergen free, certified B Corp, and made traceable. There's no more shame in your gut game. Symbiotic Plus and Ritual are here to celebrate, not hide your insides. Get 25% off your first month for a limited time at ritual.com/haven. Start Ritual or add Symbiotic Plus to your subscription today. That's ritual.com/haven for 25% off.
This episode is brought to you by Efficienade. Efficienade offers fractional virtual assistants whose sole purpose is to help people who are making a difference. Are you bogged down in your email and still managing your own calendar? Delegating those tasks to a high-caliber career assistant can free you up to utilize your time towards the areas of your best and highest use, allowing you to focus on the areas you truly thrive in. Learn more at efficienade.com. That's efficient, AIDE.com. Okay, back to the episode.
Dr. Bolt Taylor found in research that our emotions are basically a biochemical rush that comes over us. I like to think of it as a wave. So like for every wave that comes up on the ocean, it ultimately subsides.
Mm-hmm.
So when this biochemical rush or this biochemical wave comes over you, it has to flush out of your body like a wave. It has to subside. Mm-hmm. So then researchers got super interested in this and they're like, well, how long do these biochemical waves last when they come over your body? When you experience an emotion, that's like a wave. When you experience multiple emotions, those are multiple waves. But for each wave, they found it only lasts 60 to 90 seconds before it subsides and flushes out of your body. And then when I first heard that, I was like, that's not true. Embarrassment lasts me 2 years. No. Shame? Oh my gosh. What are you talking about? 90 seconds? I was like, This is false. Go research it again. Uh-huh. And then I flipped the next page. They're basically like, if you experience an emotion for longer than 90 seconds, it sounds harsh, but you're the problem. So what you're doing is you're basically ruminating over what just happened because it made you feel uncomfortable. So what happens when you go back in the past and you recall it right now in the present moment is that your brain is an associational organ. So that means the same wave that was triggered in that event is triggered again in the present moment. And then maybe you wait a few minutes and then you think about it again. Same wave comes over you. You think about it again. Same wave comes over you. And what was only meant to be one wave, it develops a tsunami in your head. And that's why so many people are so afraid of emotions, because they feel them. They feel them in the weight of a tsunami rather than a simple wave that was only meant to come over them, inform them about what's happening. And then that's it.
So I don't know if people even intend to overindulge. I feel like that's like an accident. So what does it look like to feel one wave? Then do you think about something else, or what do you do after you feel the emotion?
Exactly. So they actually did this really funny study. I might botch this a little bit, but I'm just going to tell you like the point. So they asked people to come in and they're basically like, okay, we're going to give you this clicker, and all you have to do in this study is you cannot think about a white elephant. Mm-hmm. And every time you think about a white elephant, click this clicker. Mm-hmm. Turns out the only thing that these people weren't supposed to do was the only thing that they did.
Right.
And in the span of a minute, they thought about a white elephant for, 25 to 50 times. Mm-hmm. It's crazy. So we're all ultimately going to go back and recall. But what the key is to navigate through these difficult emotions through this formula. And it's called the Rosenberg Reset. And this is how you move through and you create confidence in your emotional life rather than receding and just hiding under a rock. Mm-hmm. And the formula is 1 choice, 8 emotions, 90 seconds to mastering a life you love. And the 1 choice is just staying present in your moment to moment, not in just like great life experiences. Oh, I'm going to stay present for this. In every moment to moment experience that you have in life, whether you're feeling a difficult emotion or not, stay present and do something that she calls riding the wave. So I like to use like the surfing metaphor. So basically like surfing is very difficult. I'm not just being like, ride the wave, but yeah, mouth shines. Like woo-woo. Uh-huh. No, like surfing a wave is so difficult. Mm-hmm. And it requires practice, and it requires skill, and it requires a lot of courage. And the moment you start to try to do it for the first time, you're probably going to get a little bit depressed because you're like, this is way harder than I expected. But once you stay present in the moment to moment, you'll begin to create slowly. It's not going to be immediate, but you'll slowly begin to build this emotional confidence. And I thought emotional confidence was something completely different. They describe emotional confidence and confidence in general in life as your ability to know that you are capable and you are resourceful. And I've never heard that definition before. And it's not just like an affirmation like, I am capable. Yeah. I am resourceful. What capability is when capability is majorly when you turn inwards. And you have the knowingness inside of yourself that, hey, if I get met with 1 or more of these 8 difficult emotions, I know that I can persevere and move through them and experience them, stay present, and get to the other side. That's it. And then resourcefulness is, interestingly enough, turning outwards. And resourcefulness develops your confidence, ironically, because you learn how to come face to face with the part of yourself that is dependent. It's very interesting. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't have expected that for confidence, because I wouldn't think that feeling dependent would make me confident. But the reason that it makes you so confident is because you know that, hey, I can be resourceful. And when I'm feeling helplessness or one of these like debilitating emotions, I can ask for help. And that in itself gives you such a boost of confidence, because you're now secured internally and externally, and you have somewhat of a foundation to move forward in emotional confidence.
I feel like that's so huge of like we're wired for connection, like to ourselves, to others. But even I think of you talking about like riding the wave, as you were like talking about, I was thinking, okay, what makes it difficult for me to do that in the moment? Sometimes it doesn't feel appropriate to ride the wave in the moment. In the sense of like, and maybe that's the story I tell myself, and maybe that's the scenario. But in the times that that's happened and I've silenced whatever emotion is coming up, I feel it in my body. Like sometimes it triggers a migraine. Like truly, like there's like debilitating physical ailments that can happen when you are shut off or shutting down or whatever, like pushing things down. It does show up in another area. It's like what she was saying, of it just piles on there. And so I think it's just crazy of like, okay, how would you ride the wave? And then you said it's like, oh, going out for help. I'm like, oh, it's maybe it doesn't feel appropriate because that's vulnerable and it would be asking for help. You know, like maybe that is the point, is we're not always going to not like have it together, but like maybe humanity is messy. And I think that's sometimes why like emotions are difficult, because I'm like, oh, it's just so messy. So messy to admit it. So messy to feel it. So messy to say it. It's so messy like to even experience that. Like these 8 emotions, I think most people like would be like, yeah, I'd be cool never feeling shame. I'd be cool not to be, you know, humiliated or depressed or whatever. Like, but I'm like, oh, you don't get to bypass it.
Truly. And if you do try to bypass it, I thought that, oh, you can like to a certain extent, just like, oh, I'm strong in this moment, I'll deal with this later. But that creates the craziest physical unhealth in your body that I ever thought was possible, like disease level. So basically what happens is that every time you intentionally or unintentionally disconnect from your emotions, you create brick by brick by brick a wall between you and streams of information from your brain that you need in order to survive. And it's crazy because the more you do it, the higher this wall gets and the more you feel disconnected from yourself. And psychologist Dr. Joan Rosenberg coined this term called Soulful Depression. And it's basically when people would come into her in her 30 years of psychologist experience, and they would be like, I'm majorly depressed. I need medication. I'm going to be depressed forever. I have chemical imbalance. And what she found is that these people were only soulfully depressed because these people were plainly just feeling the disconnection between themselves and the streams of this information that they needed in order to survive. So what you do when you like push down these emotions is you can create a form of depression that should have never been in your body before if you knew the drastic effects of what pushing down your emotions can do to you.
Wow. So if someone is like listening to all of this and being like, this was interesting and very fascinating, and I was very educated, what do I do? Like if you were to say like emotional literacy 101, is there a certain technique or a tool that someone can like, okay, stop listening to this episode and like bring into their day?
I would say just learn how to ride the wave and know that it is extremely difficult at the beginning. But I would honestly say that everybody needs a therapist that is very emotionally aware and attuned, especially in the emotions areas of things, to help you learn how to navigate this.
But I think even one of the first steps is feeling it in your body of like, where am I feeling this in my body? Maybe I can't name it yet, but like, is my stomach tight? You know, do I feel tense? Like, is my heart racing? Like thinking of like, where is it showing up there? And then maybe even, okay, like what's the scenario that came up that made me feel this way, you know? And then trying to explore. I think it's so much of a self-exploration where I think of like a scenario that might have triggered that and then trying to get down to the piece. Or like, maybe it's like, oh, I felt left out. And instead of creating the story of like, well, that's dumb, like maybe I didn't want to go anyways, or maybe they have reasons or whatever, it's just saying, oh, everyone feels left out sometimes, you know, like I totally get that. Of course you feel left out, even if you didn't choose to go, you know, that's a real feeling and it doesn't have to own you. And it's the 90 seconds of feeling that and not labeling these stories, not jumping to your head to over explain or rationalize why you don't feel that way. It's just, I think it's usually with negative emotions. I feel like a lot of us can be literate with the positive emotions, you know.
Oh, yeah.
I feel elated. Yeah, I feel in love, you know. Yeah. I feel bubbly. I think it's those other ones where it's like when they're coming up and the natural reaction is to just either plow through or distract. It's like, what's coming up? But then also naming it, it feels less scary. Like when you actually say it, it feels like more of a release than the energy that was put towards resisting the emotion. Resisting an emotion sometimes feels like sitting on a beach ball in the pool of like, it takes a lot to stay there. It takes a lot to engage and it's really, really difficult versus stop trying to push past it. Just label it, acknowledge it. And it really does, like the wave really does crash past of you.
And also as you're like giving this advice, it's so true because every time you move through a difficult emotion and you don't back down and you don't do the suppression, repression, all this stuff, you increase what Dr. Dan Siegel calls the window of tolerance. So right now, everybody listening is at a different window of tolerance when it comes to the emotions that they feel. Because we all actually feel emotions with different intensity and duration and whatever. But every time, like we were saying, you ride the wave, you stay present, you don't run away from the vulnerability or whatever you feel, your window of tolerance gets better and better and better. And I just think of this picture right now, and it's just like, of course, like when you're going to first learn how to surf, imagine just like the wave coming up, you're about to go, and then you're just like, nope. Let go of the surfboard, fall into the water every time. Because you're like, no, it's too much effort. No, I'm too scared. No, it's way too big. Are you kidding me? How could somebody balance on that thing? Of course not. And then you look over next to you and you see somebody like a professional surfing and you're like, well, that's just meant for them because they're a professional, they're talented, they know how to surf. My body's just not meant for that. I'm meant for other things. I feel like we're the same way with emotional literacy at times. It's just like, if you're not good at it and you look at your friend that is good at it and you just give them the label of, oh, they're just good with like you, for instance, everybody knows you as like very emotionally literate. So I just think of people being like, okay, well, Haven's just like that. I'll just ask her to help me with this, well, whatever. I'm not this way. It's because every time that she is faced with these difficult encounters, she doesn't just hide from them. And I'm sure we all hide from them at some point. Yeah. It's like, no one's perfect over here. Yeah. But it's a built skill, just like professional surfing is a skill. At one point, that person hopped on a surfboard and they fell off the first time too.
You're actually so spot on. And I remember I was called out for this once in a great way. So if anyone's familiar with the Anagram, it's a 9 personality type, like numbering kind of thing. There's different, like basically overall like labels for each one. So the 3 is the achiever. And they're not known to like necessarily divulge in emotions similar that the 4 would, who's an individualist, who's like super romantic, deep feeler, that kind of thing. So we can get into an Enneagram episode later, but I remember I was at a party and I was talking with a friend who was a 4 and she was like, oh, I'm all in my feelings. And I said once, and I was like, well, I'm a 3 and I don't have time for those or whatever. Someone who was very wise was also at this party and he was like, well, I don't know about that, Haven. And I was like, oh no, he's about to come for me. And he was like, he goes, he had pulled up, I had taken another assessment called the Berkman. And he pulled up the Berkman and he was like, you're actually really driven by emotion, but you can't identify that it's feelings. You think it's data. So you think you're acting out of data, but it's actually your impression of something. And you just labeled it as data when it's really not. And I was like, wait, what? Like, what does that mean? What are you saying? And it took me so long to even understand it. Cause one, I was just writing off of like, surfing's not for me. You know, you guys, you Enneagram 4s, you surf, that water's cold. Yeah, there's sharks there. I don't want to put a wetsuit on, you know, whatever. But the more I thought about it, he was spot on. And I remember one of the clips from one of the earlier episodes with Aaron went viral, and it was the one that I was saying that he was coming home late, and I was like, you know, frustrated, and like it meant all these other things. And it was, then our therapist was like, well, how does it make you feel? And I was like, I feel betrayed. He goes, nope, that's still about Aaron. Like, how do you feel? And I was like, I don't know. And eventually it became to, I feel lonely, but I was making it all about data, you know, like Aaron's coming home late and these other types of things, versus not whittling down to the actual important piece, which was, I feel lonely. And so it's that kind of sense of like, it can be easy to write off, and it can be a learned skill, but it's tough. Like, it's tough to learn. You see someone who's like navigating the waves, and it's like, how do I even get there? But it's helpful. I will say, like, in the mind body connection, I have had way fewer migraines. Like, and my migraines were actually spurred on because when I was preparing for this, I was like, that's so crazy because they're very tied to my emotions. They came up in my life during my parents' divorce. And I had never tied that together, where I was like, oh my gosh, huge feelings that I did not know how to articulate. They came through, and it was like, as I'm getting more mind and body and spiritual, like, and soul healing, I see it in other areas. Like, I see it in health in my body. I see it health in my relationships. I see it in the health of like my children and how I'm trying to help them like name 2 emotions that they're feeling in the moment. And so I just think it's interesting if there is this deep connection of not just writing off of like, oh, it would be too hard to acknowledge these feelings, you know, going into the danger really can make a huge difference.
And it's so strange the way that we try to make ourselves feel powerful and ignore the vulnerability that we do feel is actually the exact thing that is making us so weak. Because when you push down vulnerability in any area of your life, you literally, to your cellular level, become more vulnerable and weaker. And it just creates this cycle of like, oh, if you can't face this feeling of weakness and you just try to ignore it, you will become weak. And it's so sad because you get more pressed down, more pressed down, more pressed down, more pressed down by just trying to get your feet just standing up and just like your body standing up and be like, I can face this, but you're just trying to be strong in all the wrong ways. And I saw that so much in myself as well. And it's so interesting how we do try to protect ourselves and just like put it onto somebody else.
Yeah.
It reminds me of this study done by Dr. Bruce Lipton. He's a cell biologist, so this isn't so much psychology, but they eventually did tie it to psychology. And he found that when cells move towards nutrients, they exhibit a growth response. And when cells are retreating from toxins, they exhibit a protective response. So he found that you and me are multicellular organisms. So this is true for us too. So we can like push it over to our bodies too and really examine the way that we grow and we protect. But what's interesting is that he found that humans do not have the capacity to protect themselves and grow. It's very interesting because when we're growing, we exhibit when we're in the processes of growth, we expend and we produce energy. But when you're in the process of protection, you are literally withering away. Truly sustained protection withers you holistically in every regard. And it's so interesting, even us who are cellular level. I don't know if you've ever heard the quote, like, if you're not growing, you're dying. It's true to your cellular level.
And it makes you kind of question of, okay, what environment am I in right now? Am I in an environment that's encouraging growth, or am I in an environment that makes me feel like I need to be protected? I remember one time being in a work scenario where I was like, I'm nervous to make big moves because like the big moves could be rewarded or you could be like raked over the coals. And I was like, the visual that I feel is I feel like if a quarterback is throwing to me, I feel like I have alligator arms. Like I don't feel like I can fully extend and catch it or not, but and roll. Like I feel like I'm playing close to the chest because it doesn't feel safe to like totally go for like a big move. And I was like, oh, it's the environment that I'm in. Like, what kind of people are you around? Like, are people like making you feel like you need to be more protected and it's not safe to like acknowledge where you're actually at? Or is it an environment where you're like, oh, I could go in for a big thing and totally blow it, but at least I tried and I extended and I went for it. So I think the cellular level of like growth and protection is real. I think the actual environmental area of, is this an emotionally safe place for you to be, matters too.
How do you think you can create an emotionally safe space, especially in your type of work where it's very professional? You're dealing with people all the time, very hard scenarios, very emotionally challenging scenarios.
That's a great question in a work sense, because I was taking it initially thinking of like family or professional, but let's keep it in the work setting. Is you even saying like you had conflict before and you're nervous? I had to call someone and I was like nervous about the call yesterday, and I was sitting at my desk and I just was like, I don't want to do this. Like, I was like, this is going to be a tough conversation. But I was thinking, I was like, okay, I'm going at it with the information. I think emotionally safe is like, it's just, there's some practical stuff of like saying when you speak on the call, like, hey, I have some bad news, or there's something I want to tell you, or not doing this whole like placating around. I think sometimes emotionally safe is being direct. They say like clear is kind. There's a book, Radical Candor, that's really helpful of like, at least people know where they stand with you and vice versa. So I think as a leader, I think creating an emotionally safe place in the workspace is like, hey, I welcome like you saying what's happening in your life, you know? And we may not like cater to a ton of details into it. We may need to sidebar, we may need to, but I want you to like tell me if the reason that this was late was because like your kid's carpool fell through. You know, I'd rather you tell me and not be too scared to tell me. And if it happens once, okay. If it keeps happening, I care about you and I have a responsibility for this business and for us executing on the goals that we said we're going to. And your role is critical for that. So if this keeps happening and it's not able to, we're going to need to talk about that in the sense of those things are not mutually exclusive. I care about you and I have a commitment to this business, and I'm going to make the decisions that are the best interest of the business. I even said we had a new group of mid-managers like onboarding last month, and I was saying, I'm going to try and make this work for you as best as possible, and I'm going to make it work for the business. If there's ever a choice where it's between like the two, I'm going to do my very best to have it together. But ultimately, I have to make decisions for the health of our business, which is then the health of everyone else on our team. Like if the business goes under, then all of us are out of jobs. Like I have to make that best interest, but know that I care about both. So I think it's also being clear and kind for me as like a leader of like being clear where you stand and not trying to please everyone and being direct, and then not over explaining, not being overly apologetic, not even being overly emotionally indulgent, but you're talking to humans. You're not talking to robots. Like you have to like also know that it's going to be a little bit messy sometimes.
You're bringing up a conversation for me.
Ooh, tell me which one.
So this is right after I learned about the difficult emotions thing. Thank God, or this would have still been in my mind. But I felt led to have a conversation with somebody. And I go up to them. I thought they were completely different than what I expected. And I just started talking to them. And just instantly, I was like, oh, I am so uncomfortable right now. Because it's sort of what you were doing. It was like the firmness, like very firm and very straight to the point. And in some regard, it was kindness in the way that they weren't just like dilly-dallying, like putting some little like fluff here and there to make you feel emotionally comfortable.
Yeah.
And then I walked away. I was like, yeah, I feel so uncomfortable right now. I feel embarrassed. I feel humiliated. I feel vulnerable. I feel every wave to ever exist in my body.
Yeah.
And then I was walking away and I was like, Angel, go sit in your car and just count the seconds. Like, this is going to end pretty soon if you don't make it into something that it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And man, that thing subsided like in a way that I've never experienced in a conflict before.
Wow.
Because I had the confidence that I could face this head on, move through it instead of hiding and backing away from it. And just in the way that you're explaining that, that's very interesting, because I would previously think that when you're being firm and kind, you do add in some emotional fluff and you're like, I can still be kind and still tell you this, but you don't have to be. And some people are more plain and you do get a lot more done. And it's really a personal problem if you take it too personally and you don't know how to manage your own emotions when somebody's firm and kind.
Did you regret having that conversation?
No. Loved it. Loved it. I didn't like how it made me feel.
Yeah.
But it taught me a huge lesson in life. And it's that some people do not have the same communication style as you. And that's okay.
Yeah.
You don't have to take things personally. If you know how to move through emotions well, it will not scar you for life. And all that's happening is you had a conversation a little bit different than you'd expect, but it taught you something.
Totally. And you can handle it. You can handle hard conversations.
Yeah. It actually built my confidence and I'm so thankful for it.
I like that.
Yeah.
So like go into the hard conversations, go into the hard feelings, know that it will pass. I feel like that's for me the biggest takeaway of this conversation, of not ignoring them for fear of it lasting forever or for it like being overwhelming or an embarrassing feeling that I don't really want to feel. It's just, this is human. If I label it, acknowledge it, honor it, and give it enough space to go through my body, it's just information. It's just my body giving me information. It really is chemical, which is kind of wild to think about.
It's a little text message your body's sending you because it loves you.
That's so cute.
Don't block it out.
Don't block it out. Thank you for joining me, Angel.
Of course.
It was fun to have all of the science data with this.
I'm glad I could share.
Well, thank you for listening. I appreciate you being a part of it and riding the wave of this conversation. Ride the wave of the conversation. So my requests are that you please review and rate on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. That really helps get this some more visibility. You can also sign up for my newsletter at havenpod.com. There's a monthly newsletter that goes out. Follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Haven the Podcast. And then outside of that, I loved this episode, especially as a follow-up to Gentle Parenting, because it is so interconnected. It's basically like, okay, gentle parenting is about naming a feeling. How do you even get to the point of naming a feeling for a child if it's difficult for yourself? And so I feel like these are some helpful follow-up tools for that one. If you haven't checked out that episode, go check it out now. And then I think maybe even this one will hit a little deeper after checking it out. Thank you so much, and I'll see you later.